The first signs that something had gone wrong were not dramatic. There was no abandoned car discovered on a lonely roadside, no emergency call filled with panic, no witness describing a desperate struggle in the darkness. Instead, there was only silence. On the morning of February 28, 2005, 19-year-old Lisa Dorrian simply failed to return home. For a short time, those closest to her believed there had to be an ordinary explanation. Perhaps she had stayed with friends. Perhaps her phone battery had died. Perhaps she simply needed more time. But the hours became days. The days became weeks. And before long, the search for a missing teenager transformed into one of Northern Ireland's most haunting criminal investigations. An investigation that, more than 2 decades later, still has no body, no murder conviction, and no final answers. Lisa Dorrian was not someone who disappeared without explanation. She was described as dependable, close to her family, and full of plans for the future. Those who knew her remembered an energetic young woman with a warm personality, someone who enjoyed music, spending time with friends, and looking ahead to adulthood with quiet optimism. Nothing about her life suggested she would suddenly vanish. Yet sometime after attending a party near the rural coastline of County Down, Lisa disappeared without leaving a trace. What happened during those final hours has been examined countless times by detectives, journalists, and the public alike. Every witness statement has been scrutinized. Every reported sighting has been investigated. Every possible lead has been pursued. Over the years, police would conduct extensive searches across fields, farms, beaches, reservoirs, and remote countryside. They would interview hundreds of witnesses, gather thousands of pieces of information, and even rely on covert surveillance operations that appeared to reveal chilling admissions about Lisa's fate. At one point, investigators became convinced they knew what had happened. They believed Lisa had been murdered. They believed multiple people knew the truth. Yet belief alone could never replace the evidence required inside a courtroom. Without the discovery of Lisa herself, the investigation faced an obstacle that has challenged homicide detectives across the world, proving a murder when the victim has never been found. As years passed, hope gradually gave way to determination. Lisa's family refused to let her become just another forgotten missing person. Her mother, her sisters, and those who loved her continued to appeal for information year after year, asking only for honesty, for someone to finally explain what happened during the final hours of February 27, 2005. The case would eventually become one of Northern Ireland's longest-running missing person investigations and one of its most complex suspected murders. It would involve allegations of intimidation, organized criminal connections, anonymous tip-offs, hidden recordings, renewed searches decades later, and repeated public appeals from detectives convinced that someone, somewhere, was still protecting the truth. Yet despite all the investigative work, one simple question has never been answered. Where is Lisa Dorrian? This is not merely the story of a young woman who disappeared after a party. It is the story of an investigation that has stretched across generations, of detectives pursuing fragments of evidence through years of silence, and of a family forced to live without certainty while never giving up hope. Because somewhere between the music, the darkness, and the isolated fields along Northern Ireland's eastern coast, 19-year-old Lisa Dorrian vanished, and for more than 20 years, someone has known exactly why. 2. To understand why Lisa Dorrian's disappearance resonated so deeply across Northern Ireland, it is important to understand who she was long before she became the subject of a missing person investigation. Lisa Dorrian was born into a close-knit family in Northern Ireland. She grew up in the town of Bangor, County Down, a coastal community known for its busy marina, seaside promenades, and strong sense of local identity. Friends and relatives would later describe her as someone who enjoyed ordinary moments with the people she loved. She was sociable, approachable, and possessed a quiet confidence that made it easy for others to feel comfortable around her. At 19 years old, Lisa stood on the threshold of adulthood. Like many young people her age, she was balancing work, friendships, and the excitement of planning for the future. Those closest to her remembered a young woman who embraced life with optimism. She enjoyed going out with friends, listening to music, and attending social gatherings, but she remained deeply connected to her family, who expected to hear from her regularly. There was nothing in her daily routine that suggested she was preparing to leave home or disappear voluntarily. Her family has consistently maintained that Lisa was reliable. If her plans changed, she would usually let someone know. She was not known for vanishing without explanation or cutting off contact with the people closest to her. That reputation would later become one of the earliest reasons investigators treated her disappearance as deeply suspicious. The Dorrian family shared a close bond. Lisa's disappearance would forever alter their lives, but before that devastating February weekend in 2005, their concerns were the same as those of countless other families with a teenage daughter, hopes for her future, everyday conversations, and the ordinary rhythms of family life. In early 2005, Northern Ireland was experiencing a period of gradual change. Although the decades-long conflict known as the Troubles had largely subsided. Following the 1998 peace process, many communities were still dealing with its lasting effects. Some rural areas remained tightly connected through long-standing social networks, and in certain places, people were often reluctant to speak openly about sensitive matters, particularly if criminality or individuals with paramilitary associations were involved. This broader social landscape would later become an important backdrop to Lisa's case. Detectives would eventually suggest that fear, loyalty, and intimidation may have discouraged potential witnesses from coming forward with information. While investigators have never publicly alleged that Lisa herself had any involvement in criminal activity, they repeatedly acknowledged that aspects of the investigation unfolded within communities where silence could be difficult to break. During this period, weekends often revolved around gatherings with friends rather than large public events. Young adults would frequently meet at private houses, farms, or isolated properties where music could play late into the night without attracting the attention that a town center venue might. These gatherings were common across rural County Down, particularly among groups of friends who knew one another through local connections. One such gathering was planned for the final weekend of February 2005. The location was unusual but familiar to those attending. A caravan situated on farmland near Ballyhalbert, a small village on the eastern edge of the Ards Peninsula. Surrounded by open countryside and only a short distance from the rugged coastline, the site offered privacy that appealed to young people looking to spend an evening away from crowded pubs or clubs. Lisa intended to attend the gathering with people she knew. To those around her, it was simply another social occasion. No one imagined it would become the last confirmed place she would ever be seen. When Lisa left for the party, there was every expectation that she would return home after the weekend, carrying nothing more significant than memories of another night spent with friends. Instead, that ordinary decision would mark the beginning of a mystery that has endured for decades. By the time the sun rose over County Down on February 28, 2005, Lisa Dorrian had disappeared. Her family had no idea that the life they knew was about to change forever. The search for answers had not yet begun. But the final confirmed chapter of Lisa's life was already unfolding, hidden within the events of a single night at a remote caravan overlooking the Irish Sea. 3. The final confirmed hours of Lisa Dorrian's life began like countless other weekend evenings. It was Sunday, February 27, 2005. 19-year-old Lisa had arranged to spend the evening with friends at a party near the village of Ballyhalbert on the Ards Peninsula in County Down. The gathering was being held in a caravan situated on farmland off Ballyhalbert Road, a quiet rural location surrounded by open fields and only a short distance from the coastline. To those invited, it was not an unusual venue. Private gatherings at caravans and farm properties were common among local groups of young adults. The isolated setting offered privacy, allowing music to play late into the night without disturbing nearby residents. Lisa traveled to the party with friends, expecting nothing more than an evening of conversation, music, and socializing. As darkness settled over the peninsula, guests gradually arrived. Some knew one another well, while others were acquaintances connected through mutual friends. Throughout the evening, people came and went. making it difficult to establish an exact timeline of everyone who was present at any given moment. What investigators would later determine with confidence was that Lisa remained at the caravan into the early hours of Monday, February 28th. During the night, witnesses recalled seeing her interacting normally with others. There was nothing to suggest she believed she was in danger. By all available accounts, she appeared relaxed, enjoying the company around her. As the hours passed and the party began to wind down, many guests started leaving. Some arranged lifts home, while others departed in small groups. The once busy gathering slowly became quieter. Exactly what happened next has remained the central mystery of the entire investigation. At some point during the early morning, Lisa was no longer seen. The last confirmed sighting of her places her at or near the caravan. Investigators have never publicly identified a reliable witness who saw Lisa safely leave the property or arrive anywhere else afterward. This gap in the timeline would become one of the most significant challenges facing detectives. Initially, there was uncertainty about whether Lisa had simply left with someone without informing others. In the confusion that often follows the end of a late-night gathering, it was possible that people assumed someone else knew where she had gone. But as the hours passed, those assumptions began to unravel. Lisa never returned home. She did not contact her family. She did not appear at the homes of friends. Her mobile phone offered no explanation for her disappearance. For her family, the silence was immediate and deeply unsettling. Those closest to Lisa knew that disappearing without contacting anyone was completely out of character. She had always maintained regular contact with her loved ones, especially if her plans changed. The longer she remained unreachable, the more concerned they became. What had first seemed like an unusual delay quickly developed into genuine alarm. As news spread that Lisa could not be found, investigators began speaking with those who had attended the gathering. Reconstructing the night's events proved extraordinarily difficult. Witnesses gave differing accounts about who had been present when people had left, and what conversations had taken place during the early hours of the morning. Some memories had faded almost immediately, while others conflicted with one another. Detectives would spend years revisiting these statements, comparing timelines, and attempting to identify inconsistencies that might reveal what had happened after the party ended. The remote location added another layer of complexity. The caravan sat amid farmland with limited lighting and few nearby homes. Anyone leaving the area during the early hours would have entered dark country roads where there were virtually no independent witnesses or surveillance cameras to record their movements. Unlike disappearances in urban areas, there was no network of CCTV footage tracing Lisa's journey, no verified sightings, no bank transactions, no confirmed phone activity placing her somewhere else. It was as though the trail ended at the caravan itself. As detectives continued examining the timeline, one possibility became increasingly difficult to ignore. If Lisa had never been seen leaving the property, perhaps she had never left at all. That theory would fundamentally change the direction of the investigation. What had initially been treated as a missing person inquiry slowly began to resemble something far more sinister. Investigators started asking whether a crime had taken place during those final hours, and whether the people who had been at the party knew more than they were willing to admit. Over time, police would come to believe that Lisa's disappearance was not the result of an accident or a voluntary decision to walk away. They concluded that she had almost certainly been murdered sometime after she was last seen at the caravan. Yet reaching that conclusion was only the beginning. Without a body, a crime scene, or a definitive account of what had happened inside or around the isolated property, detectives faced an investigation built almost entirely on fragments of testimony, circumstantial evidence, and unanswered questions. Somewhere between the final conversations of the night and the first light of dawn, Lisa Dorrian vanished. The people who attended that gathering returned to their everyday lives. Lisa never did. 4. By the morning of Monday, February 28, 2005, concern had begun to replace uncertainty. When Lisa Dorrian failed to return home or make contact with her family, those closest to her immediately sensed that something was wrong. This was not consistent with her character. Lisa was known to keep in touch with her family, particularly if her plans changed or if she intended to stay somewhere unexpectedly. At first, there was hope that a simple explanation would emerge. Friends contacted one another asking whether anyone had seen Lisa after the party or knew where she might have gone. Calls were made to people who had attended the gathering near Ballyhalbert, but the answers only deepened the mystery. No one could provide a clear account of Lisa's movements after the early hours of the morning. As the hours passed, the situation became increasingly alarming. Her mobile phone was no longer providing any indication of her whereabouts. There were no messages explaining her absence and no confirmed sightings placing her elsewhere. Every passing hour strengthened the fear that Lisa had not simply chosen to disappear. Recognizing that her disappearance was entirely out of character, her family reported her missing to the police. What began as a missing person inquiry quickly developed into a large-scale investigation led by the Police Service of Northern Ireland, known as the PSNI. From the outset, detectives faced a difficult challenge. The last confirmed location where Lisa had been seen was an isolated caravan on farmland outside Ballyhalbert. Unlike a disappearance in a busy town or city, there were no extensive CCTV networks to review, no public transport records to examine, and few independent witnesses who might have observed her movements after she left the gathering, if she had left at all. Investigators immediately began interviewing everyone known to have attended the party. Each witness was asked to reconstruct the evening in as much detail as possible. Who arrived first? Who left last? Who had spoken with Lisa? Did anyone see her leave the caravan? Did anyone notice an argument, unusual behavior, or anything that seemed out of place? The answers were often incomplete. Some attendees could remember only fragments of the night. Others provided accounts that differed from one another in important ways. Detectives carefully compared every statement, hoping the inconsistencies would reveal a clearer picture of Lisa's final hours. At the same time, officers began searching the surrounding area. The countryside around Ballyhalbert presented enormous practical challenges. Open farmland stretched across the peninsula, intersected by narrow roads, hedgerows, drainage ditches, and isolated buildings. Nearby lay rugged sections of coastline where rough terrain and changing tides complicated search efforts. Search teams methodically examined fields, farm buildings, tracks, and areas surrounding the caravan. Specialist officers were brought in to assist, using search techniques designed to locate evidence that might have been overlooked during an initial examination. Every item recovered from the area had to be evaluated to determine whether it had any connection to Lisa's disappearance. Days turned into weeks. Despite extensive efforts, investigators found no trace of Lisa. There were no personal belongings abandoned in the surrounding fields, no confirmed forensic evidence publicly identified as explaining what had happened, no discovery that could tell detectives where she had gone after the party. As news of the disappearance spread, Lisa's photograph appeared across Northern Ireland. Television news broadcasts carried appeals from police and her family. Newspapers published her image alongside requests for anyone with information to come forward. Community groups organized searches, and volunteers joined police in combing areas where Lisa might have traveled. Every possible lead, no matter how small, was assessed. The Dorrian family became the public face of the search. They appeared before cameras with a simple message. If anyone knew anything about Lisa's disappearance, no matter how insignificant it seemed, they should speak to the police. Their appeals were measured but emotional. They asked for honesty rather than speculation. They asked for facts rather than rumors. Most of all, they wanted Lisa home. As investigators continued gathering witness statements, one troubling pattern began to emerge. Several aspects of the accounts given by people who had attended the party did not fit together neatly. Timelines overlapped, memories conflicted. Certain details remained unexplained. While inconsistencies alone were not proof of a crime, they were enough to convince detectives that Lisa's disappearance required far more than a routine missing person investigation. The search gradually shifted in both scope and purpose. Officers were no longer searching only for a missing teenager. They were beginning to search for evidence that a serious crime had occurred. Although the investigation remained publicly classified as a missing person inquiry, detectives privately started considering the possibility that Lisa had never left the caravan alive. It was a theory they could not yet prove, but with no confirmed sightings after the party, no communication from Lisa, and no evidence that she had voluntarily disappeared, investigators found themselves confronting an increasingly grim reality. Somewhere within the events of that isolated gathering lay the explanation for Lisa's disappearance. The challenge was uncovering it before memories faded, evidence disappeared, and those who knew the truth chose to remain silent. As the days following Lisa Dorrian's disappearance turned into weeks, investigators from the Police Service of Northern Ireland faced a growing realization. This was no longer a case that could be explained by a young woman choosing to leave home voluntarily. There was no activity on Lisa's bank accounts that suggested she was starting a new life elsewhere. No confirmed use of her mobile phone pointed to her being alive after the party. Friends, relatives, and colleagues all gave the same assessment. Disappearing without contacting anyone was completely inconsistent with who Lisa was. The evidence was notable not for what it revealed, but for what it lacked. It was as though Lisa had simply vanished. Detectives responded by broadening the investigation. Rather than focusing solely on where Lisa might have gone, they began examining everything that had happened in the hours leading up to her disappearance. The caravan near Ballyhalbert became the central focus of their inquiry, along with everyone who had been present there during the final hours of February 27th and the early morning of February 28, 2005. Investigators conducted repeated interviews with partygoers, often speaking to the same individuals multiple times over the course of the investigation. It is a common investigative technique in serious criminal cases. As memories settle and witnesses are asked to recount events again, small inconsistencies can emerge. Details that may not have seemed important initially but can become significant when compared against other evidence. In Lisa's case, detectives found that not every account aligned. People differed on the sequence of events, who had been present at certain times, and exactly when individuals had left the caravan. Some discrepancies were likely the result of imperfect memory after a late-night gathering. Others, investigators believed, required closer examination. Police carefully reconstructed a timeline using witness statements, telephone records, and every piece of information available to them. Their objective was straightforward: establish Lisa's final confirmed movements and identify the point at which the evidence stopped. Again and again, the investigation returned to the same conclusion. There was no verified evidence placing Lisa anywhere after the party. That absence became increasingly significant. As detectives expanded their inquiries, they also began looking beyond those who had attended the gathering. They spoke with local residents, motorists who had traveled through the area during the night, and anyone who might have seen unusual activity on the roads surrounding Ballyhalbert. Public appeals encouraged anyone with even the smallest piece of information to come forward. Many tips were received. Some led nowhere. Others required extensive follow-up before being ruled out. Each potential sighting, reported conversation, or anonymous phone call had to be investigated thoroughly. In a case with so little physical evidence, even seemingly minor information could prove crucial. At the same time, specialist search teams continued examining the rural landscape around the caravan. Open farmland, drainage ditches, abandoned structures, wooded areas, and sections of coastline were searched repeatedly. Officers worked alongside forensic specialists, using methods designed to identify evidence that might have been concealed or overlooked. The searches were painstaking. Every area had to be examined methodically, with investigators aware that even the smallest discovery could fundamentally alter the direction of the case. Yet each search ended with the same devastating result: no trace of Lisa. As the investigation progressed, detectives also examined whether Lisa could have left the area by vehicle. They reviewed the movements of individuals known to have attended the party and attempted to determine who had access to transport during the early morning hours. While police have never publicly disclosed every aspect of this work, it became clear that investigators were narrowing their focus toward a relatively small group of individuals who had been present during Lisa's final known hours. Even so, suspicion is not proof. Detectives still lacked the forensic evidence necessary to establish exactly what had occurred. This presented one of the greatest difficulties in the investigation. Without a body, investigators had no confirmed crime scene, no medical evidence establishing a cause of death, and no opportunity for forensic examination that often provides critical answers in homicide cases. Instead, they were forced to build the investigation piece by piece, relying on witness testimony, circumstantial evidence, and careful analysis of every lead. Behind the scenes, experienced detectives began considering a troubling possibility. If Lisa had been murdered, then it was increasingly likely that more than one person knew what had happened. In many homicide investigations, particularly those involving groups of people, maintaining complete secrecy becomes more difficult as time passes. Memories weigh heavily, relationships change, loyalties shift, conversations thought to be private are repeated. Rumors spread through communities. Investigators believed that someone, somewhere, possessed information capable of breaking the case open. The challenge was convincing that person to speak. Publicly, police remained careful in their language. They continued appealing for information while avoiding speculation about precisely what they believed had happened. Privately, however, the direction of the investigation was changing. Detectives were beginning to move away from the question of where Lisa had gone. Instead, they were asking who had prevented her from ever coming home. That shift marked a turning point in the case. The search for a missing teenager was steadily becoming a homicide investigation, despite the absence of the one piece of evidence every family desperately hoped would still be found: Lisa herself. 6. As the investigation intensified, detectives became increasingly convinced that the key to understanding Lisa Dorrian's disappearance did not lie hidden somewhere in the fields surrounding Ballyhalbert. It lay in the memories of the people who had been with her during her final known hours. From the very beginning, police had interviewed those who attended the gathering at the caravan, but as weeks turned into months, many of those individuals were questioned again and again. Investigators revisited earlier statements, compared timelines, and searched for inconsistencies that might reveal what had happened after the party began to break up. In any major criminal investigation, conflicting witness accounts are not unusual. People experience events differently, memories fade, and late-night social gatherings often become difficult to reconstruct with complete accuracy. But in Lisa's case, detectives believed some inconsistencies could not be explained by faulty memory alone. One recurring difficulty involved establishing a precise timeline. Witnesses disagreed about exactly when Lisa was last seen. Some recalled speaking with her during the early hours of February 28th, while others were uncertain about the sequence of events as people gradually left the caravan. The movement of guests throughout the night created overlapping and sometimes contradictory accounts that complicated efforts to determine who remained at the property during Lisa's final confirmed moments. Investigators also sought to identify who had left the gathering together and who had departed separately. These details mattered. If Lisa had left the caravan voluntarily, someone should have seen her leave. Someone should have known who she left with or where she intended to go. Yet, despite extensive interviews, no reliable witness emerged who could definitively place Lisa safely away from the caravan after the party. That absence became increasingly difficult for detectives to ignore. Police also examined whether alcohol consumption during the evening had affected witnesses' recollections. As is common at late-night gatherings, memories varied considerably. Some people admitted they could not remember every detail of the night, while others expressed confidence in recollections that did not always align with those of fellow partygoers. Rather than dismissing these inconsistencies, investigators carefully documented them. Each interview was compared against previous statements. Every change, however minor, was noted. Detectives looked for patterns rather than isolated contradictions. They wanted to determine whether differing accounts reflected ordinary human error or whether someone was deliberately withholding information. As the investigation progressed, another troubling possibility emerged. Police began to suspect that not everyone who had knowledge of Lisa's disappearance was being entirely truthful. Over the years, detectives repeatedly stated that they believed certain individuals knew far more than they had disclosed. This belief was based not on a single interview, but on the cumulative weight of the investigation. Witness statements, intelligence gathered during the inquiry, forensic work, and information received from confidential sources. Although officers have never publicly identified every person of interest or revealed all the evidence gathered during those early years, they consistently emphasized one point: someone was protecting the truth. That belief shaped the direction of the investigation. Detectives appealed not only to those present at the caravan, but also to anyone who may have heard conversations afterward. They recognized that significant information often surfaces long after a crime has occurred. Relationships change, friendships end. People confide in family members or acquaintances. The search was no longer just about finding Lisa. It was becoming a race to uncover a truth that someone had worked very hard to keep hidden. In Part 2, the investigation enters its most critical phase, where suspected murder, covert recordings, renewed searches, arrests, and decades of unanswered questions bring detectives closer than ever to the truth behind Lisa Dorrian's disappearance. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime stories based on verified facts, court records, and official investigations. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember that the most unsettling mysteries are often the ones hidden in plain sight.